everyone. We are live again. We're trying something different this time. Instead of Zoom, we're using Facebook Live for our cyber story time. And we are reading still A Cricket in Times Square. We are up to chapter 8. So let's go. Chapter 8, Tucker's Life Savings. Chester Cricket was having a dream. In his dream, he was sitting on top of his stump back in Connecticut, eating a leaf from the willow tree. He would bite off a piece of leaf, chew it up and swallow it, but for some reason, it didn't taste as good as usual. There was something dry and papery about it, and it had a bitter flavor. Still, Chester kept eating, hoping it would begin to taste better soon. A storm came up in his dream. The wind blew clouds of dust across the meadow. They swirled about his stump, and Chester began to sneeze because the dust got up into his nose. But still, he held on to the leaf. And then he sneezed such a big sneeze that it woke him up. Chester looked around him. He had been walking in his sleep, and he was sitting on the edge of the cash register. The storm had been a gust of air that blew into the newsstand when the shuttle pulled up to the station. He was still choking on the dirt that flew around him. Chester looked down at his two front legs, but half expecting to find the willow leaf. But it was no leaf he was holding. It was a $2 bill, and he had already eaten half of it. He dropped the bill and leapt over to the cricket cage, where Tucker Mouse was sleeping peacefully. Chester shook the bell furiously. It rang like a fire alarm. Tucker jumped out from under his blanket of dollar bills and ran around the cage shouting, "Help! Murder! Fire! Police!" Then he realized where he was and sat down panting. "What's the matter with you, Chester?" he said. "I could have died from fright." I just ate half of a $2 bill," said Chester. Tucker stared at him in disbelief. "You did what?" he asked. "Yes, look." He fetched the ruined $2 bill from the cash register. "I dreamed it was a leaf, and I ate it." Oh, moaned Tucker Mouse. "Not a $1 bill, not even a $1 bill and a 50-cent piece. $2 you had to eat, and from the Bellinis, too. People who hardly make $2 in 2 days." "What am I going to do?" asked Chester. "Pack your bags and go to California," said Tucker. Chester shook his head. "I can't," he said. "They've been so good to me. I can't run away." Tucker shrugged his shoulders. Then stay and take the rap." He crept out of the cage and examined the remains of the money. "There's still half of it left. Maybe we could put Scotch tape along the edge and pass it off as a $1 bill." "No one would believe it," said Chester. He sat down, still forlornly holding the bill. Oh, dear. And things were going along so nicely. Tucker Mouse put his bedclothes back in the cash register drawer and came to sit beside Chester. "Buck up. We could still figure something out. Maybe." They both concentrated for a minute. Then Tucker clapped his paws and squeaked, "I got it! Eat the rest of it and they'll never know what happened." "They'd accuse each other of losing it," said Chester. "I don't want to make any bad feeling between them." You're so honorable," said Tucker. "It's disgusting." "Besides, it tastes bad," added Chester. "Then how about this?" Tucker had a new idea. "We frame the janitor who cleans the station. I'll take the evidence over and plant it in his closet. He whopped me with a mop last week. I would be glad to see him go to jail for a few days." "No," said Chester, "we can't get someone else in trouble." "Well, then a stranger. We'll tip over the Kleenex, break the glass on the alarm clock, and throw all the small change on the floor. They'll think a thief came in the night. You could even put a bandage on and make out like a hero. I can see it all." "No," Chester interrupted him. "The damage we'd do would cost even more than the $2. Tucker had one more idea. He was going to volunteer to go over and swipe $2 for the lunch counter, but before he could suggest it, the top of the stand was suddenly lifted off. They had forgotten what time it was. Mama Bellini, who was on duty that morning, stood towering, frowning down on them. Tucker let out a squeak of fear and jumped to the floor. "Catch the mouse!" shouted Mama. She picked up a Fortune magazine, very big and very heavy, and heaved it after Tucker. It hit him on the left leg just as he vanished into the drain pipe. Chester Cricket stood frozen to the spot. He was caught red-handed, holding the chewed-up $2 in his front legs. Muttering with rage, Mama Bellini picked him up by his antenna, threw him into the cricket cage, and locked the gate behind him. When she had put the newsstand in order, she pulled out her knitting and began to work furiously. But she was so angry she kept dropping her stitches, and that made her angrier still. Chester crouched in a far corner of the cage. Things had been going so well between Mama and him, but that was all ruined now. He half expected that she would pick him up, cage him and throw him on the shuttle tracks. At 8:30, Mario and Papa arrived. Mario wanted to go to Coney Island for a swim today, but before he could even say good morning, Mama Bellini stretched out her hand and pointed sternly at Chester. There he was, with the evidence beside him. A three-cornered conversation began. Mama denounced Chester as a money-eater and said further that she suspected him of inviting mice and other unsavory characters into the newsstand at night. Papa said he didn't think Chester had eaten the $2 on purpose, and what difference did it make if a mouse or two came in? Mama said he had to go. Papa said he could stay, but he'd have to be kept in the cage. And Mario knew that Chester, like all people who were used to freedom, would rather die than live his life behind bars. Finally, it was decided that since the cricket was Mario's pet, the boy would have to replace the money. And when he had replaced the money, Chester could come out again. Until then, the cage. By working part-time delivering groceries when he wasn't taking care of the newsstand, Mario thought he could earn enough in a couple of weeks to get Chester out of jail. Of course, that would mean no swimming at Coney Island and no movies and no nothing, but it was worth it. He fed the cricket his breakfast, leftover asparagus tips and a piece of cabbage leaf. Chester had practically no appetite after what had happened. Then, when the cricket had finished, Mario said goodbye and told him not to worry and went off to the grocery store to see about his job. That night, after Papa had shut up the newsstand, Chester was hanging through the gilded bars of his cage. Earlier in the evening, Mario had come back to feed him supper, but then he had to leave right away to get in a few more hours of work. Most of the day, Chester had spent inventing hopping games to try to keep himself entertained. But they didn't work, really. He was bored and lonely. The funny thing was, although he had been sleepy and kept wishing it was night, now that it was night, he couldn't fall asleep. Chester heard the soft padding of feet beneath him. Harry Cat sprang up and landed on the shelf. In a moment, Tucker Mouse followed behind him from the stool, groaning with pain. He was still limping in his left hind leg where the Fortune magazine had hit him. "How long's the sentence?" asked Harry. "Until Mario can pay back the money," sighed Chester. "Couldn't you get out on bail for the time being?" asked Tucker. "No," said Chester. "And anyway, nobody has any bail. I'm surprised they let me off that easily." Harry Cat folded his paws over each other and rested his head on them. "Let me get this straight," he said. "Does Mario have to work for the money as punishment, or does he just have to get it somewhere?" "Well, he just has to get it," said Chester. "Why should he be punished? I'm the one who ate the money." Harry looked at Tucker. A long look, as if he expected the mouse to say something. Tucker began to fidget. "Say, Chester, you want to escape?" he asked. "We can open the cage. You could come live with us in the drain pipe." "No," Chester shook his head. "It wouldn't be fair to Mario. I'll just have to serve out the time." Harry looked at Tucker again and began tapping one of his paws. "Well?" he said finally. Tucker moaned and massaged his sore spot. "Oh, my poor leg. Mama Bellini could sure heave a magazine. Feel the bump, Harry," he offered. "I felt it already," said Harry. "Now enough stalling. You have money." "Tucker has money?" asked Chester Cricket. Tucker looked nervously from one to the other. I have my life savings," he said in a pathetic voice. "He's the richest mouse in New York," said Harry. "Old Moneybags Mouse, she's known as." "Now, wait a minute, Harry," said Tucker. "Let's not make too much from a few nickels and dimes." "How did you get money?" asked Chester. Tucker Mouse cleared his throat and began wringing his two front feet together. When he spoke, his voice was all choked up with emotion. "Years ago," he said, "when yet a little mouse I was, tender in age and lacking in experience, I moved from the sweet scenes of my childhood, 10th Avenue, that is, into the Times Square subway station. And it was here that I learned the value of economicness, which means saving. Many an old mouse did I see, crawling away unwanted to a poor mouse's grave, because he had not saved. And I resolved that such a fate would never come to me." "All of which means you've got a pile of loot back there in the drain pipe," said Harry Cat. "Just a minute, please, if you wouldn't mind," said Tucker. "I'll tell it my own way." His voice became high and pitiful again. "For lo, these long years, when I could have been gambling, which means playing, with the other mousies, I saved. I saved paper. I saved food. I saved clothing. Save time and get to the point," said Harry. Tucker gave Harry a sour smile. "And I also saved money," he went on. "In the course of many years of scrounging, it was only natural I should find a certain amount of loose change. Oh, often, so very often, my friends," Tucker put his hand over his heart, "would I sit at the opening of my drain pipe, watching the human beings and waiting, and whenever one of them dropped a coin, however small, pennies I love, I would dash out at great peril to life and limb and bring it back to my house. Ah, when I think of the tramping shoes and the dangerous galoshes, many times have I had my toes stepped on and my whiskers torn off in these labors. But it was worth it. Oh, it was worth it, friends. On account of now I have $2 half-dollars, 5 quarters, 6 dimes, 6 nickels, 2 dimes, and 18 pennies tucked away in the drain pipe, which makes $2.93, said Harry Cat, after doing some quick addition. And proud I am of it, said Tucker Mouse. If you've got all that money, why did you want to sleep on the $2 bills in the cricket cage? Asked Chester. I don't have any folding money yet, said Tucker. It was a new sensation. You can get Chester out and still have 93 cents left, said Harry Cat. But I'll be ruined, whispered Tucker. I'll be wiped out. Who will take care of me in my old age? I will, said Harry. Now stop acting like a skinflint and get the money. Chester rang the silver bell to get their attention. I don't think Tucker should have to give up his life savings, he said. It's his money, and he can do what he wants with it. Tucker Mouse poked Harry in the ribs. Listen to the cricket, he said, acting noble and making me look like a bum. Of course I'll give him the money. Whenever mice are spoken of, never let it be said that Tucker Mouse was stingy with his worldly goods. Besides, I could think of it as rent I pay for sleeping in the cage. In order that Tucker could keep at least one of each kind of coin, Harry Cat figured out that they should bring over $1/2, 4 quarters, 1 dime, 5 nickels, and 15 cents. That would leave the mouse with $1/2, a quarter, a dime, a nickel, and 3 cents. It's not a bad beginning, said Tucker. I could make up the losses in a year, maybe. The cat and mouse had to make several trips back and forth between the drain pipe and the newsstand, carrying the money in their mouths. They passed the coins into the cage one by one, and Chester built them up into a column, starting with the $1/2 on the bottom and ending with the dime, which was the smallest, on top. It was morning by the time they had finished. They had just enough time to share half a hot dog before Mama Bellini was due to open the stand. Mario came with her. He wanted to feed Chester early and then work all morning until he took over the newsstand at noon. When they lifted off the cover, Mama almost dropped her end. There was Chester, sitting on top of the column of change, chirping merrily. Mama's first suspicion was that the cricket had sneaked out and smuggled all the money from the cash register to the cage. But when she looked in the cash register drawer, the money from the night before was still there. Mario had the idea that Papa might have left it as a surprise. Mama shook her head. She certainly would have known if he had had $2 to leave anybody. They asked Paul, the conductor, if he'd seen anyone around the newsstand. He said no. The only thing he had noticed was that the big cat who sometimes prowled through the station had seemed busier than usual last night. And, of course, they knew that he couldn't have had anything to do with replacing the money, could he? But whoever left it, Mama Bellini was good to her word. Chester was allowed out of the cage, and no further questions were asked. Although she wouldn't have admitted it for the world, Mama felt the same way about money that Tucker did. When you had it, you had it. You didn't bother too much about where it came from. Chapter 9. The Chinese Dinner. Mario decided there must be something wrong with Chester's diet if he was eating $2 bills. He had been feeding him all the things he liked, but now it occurred to him what was good for a boy might not be good for a cricket. So he made up his mind to take the matter to an expert. Late one afternoon, Mario cleaned up the cricket cage, gave Chester a dusting off with a Kleenex, and took him to see Sai-Fong. It was almost 7 o'clock when he got there, and the shop was closed. He peered through the window and could make out a crack of light under the door, and heard the choppy murmur of 2 voices talking together in Chinese. Mario rapped on the glass. The voices stopped talking. The inside door opened, and Sai-Fong came into the shop, squinting through the half-light. When he saw Mario, his chin dropped and he said, "Ah, the little cricket boy." He opened the door. "Hello, Mr. Fong," said Mario. "I don't want to bother you, but I have a problem with my cricket." "Come in, please," said Fong, closing the door. "I have a very old friend here. He knows everything about crickets." He led Mario into the next room, which was a kitchen. On a cast-iron stove there were half a dozen pots, steaming and singing. The table was laid with beautifully painted china plates. Beside the places, there had been set 2 pairs of chopsticks, each one in its own paper wrapper. A very old Chinese gentleman was sitting in a rocking chair next to the window. He had a thin gray beard that hung down from his chin, and he was wearing a long red and gold robe that looked like one on the people on the plates. When Mario came in, he stood up slowly, with his hands folded, and bowed. Mario had never had an old Chinese gentleman bow to him before, and he didn't quite know what to do, but he thought he'd better bow back. Then the Chinese man bowed again, and so did Mario. They might have gone on bowing all night if Fong hadn't said something in Chinese to his friend. It meant, "This is the boy with the cricket." Mario and Chester stole a glance at each other, but neither of them understood Chinese. The old man, however, became very excited. He peered down through the bars of the cricket cage and exclaimed with delight. Then, drawing himself up to his full height, he made a very low and solemn bow. Chester bowed back and gave one of his most polite chirps. That pleased the gentleman very much. He and Fong began laughing and talking together. It sounded like the cheerful clicking of 100 chopsticks. When they finished telling each other how fine a cricket Chester was, Fong said to Mario, "Do you like Chinese food?" "Yes," answered Mario. I guess." He had never had anything Chinese except chop suey, but he was awfully fond of that. "Wait here, please." He disappeared in the shop and came back in a minute with 2 new robes. "This one is for you," he said, helping Mario on with one. It was purple and lavender and had designs of the sun, moon, and stars stitched all over it. "And this is mine," said Fong, putting on his own robe, which was blue and green, covered with pictures of fish and reeds and water lilies. The Chinese gentleman whispered something to Fong, and Fong whispered an answer back in Chinese. "We're sorry," he said to Mario. "There is no robe small enough for the cricket." "That's all right," said Mario. "Sit down, please," said Mario sat down, and the Chinese gentleman sat opposite him. Fong put the cricket cage in the middle of the table, and then went back and forth to the stove, bringing over steaming bowls of food. Chester was very curious to see what it tasted like. "This is chow yuk, Chinese vegetables," said Fong, setting down the first bowl. There were all kinds of green vegetables, string beans and pea pods, and also pieces of diced chicken. Next came the fried rice with pork, cooked a delicious brown with a nutty, meaty flavor. Then chow mein with pan-fried noodles and cashew nuts. But it wasn't all soupy like the chow mein Mario had seen at the automat. He could have made a meal just out of the pan-fried noodles alone. And at last, there was duck cooked with pineapples. The pieces of roasted duck were swimming in a luscious sweet sauce. Finally, Fong brought over a big pot of something. "Do you know what this is?" he asked and lifted the lid. Mario looked in. "Tea," he said. Laughed Fong. "You would make a very good Chinaman," he said, and smiled at Mario. Mario had a hard time learning to use the chopsticks. They kept slipping out of his hand. "Make believe they are 2 very long fingers." said Saifong. 2 long fingers, 2 long fingers, Mario told himself over and over again. And then he could work them. He got so that he could almost feel the food at the end of them as he lifted it into his mouth. Chester was given dinner too. Saifong got a tiny saucer out of the cupboard and put a dab of each course in it for the cricket. And he had never tasted anything so good. He especially liked the Chinese vegetables. Every now and then he would have to stop eating and chirp for joy. Whenever he did, the Chinese gentleman and Saifong smiled and chattered to each other in Chinese. Mario felt the same way Chester did, but he couldn't chirp. All he could do to show how much he was enjoying everything was to answer, "Yes, please," every time Saifong asked him if he wanted more. When the 4 of them had eaten as much as they wanted, Saifong brought out some candied kumquats for dessert. Mario had 2 and several more cups of tea. Chester was so full he could only nibble on a piece of one. "Now," said Saifong, "what is the problem with the cricket?" "The problem is," Mario began, "that my cricket eats money." And he told them all about the $2 bill. Saifong had to translate everything for his friend. After each new sentence, the old man would nod his head and say, or "oh," or in a serious voice. "So I think he must not be getting the right things to eat," Mario concluded. "That is a very excellent deduction," said Saifong. He began talking rapidly in Chinese. Then he stood up and said, "Please wait," and went into the shop. In a moment he was back carrying a big book under his arm. As the 2 men were reading it, they would stop now and then and mutter something to each other. All of a sudden, the Chinese gentleman began to squeak with excitement. "Yuli, Yuli," he said, tapping the page with the stem of his pipe. Here it is, Saifong exclaimed to Mario. "This is the story of a princess in ancient China. She had a cricket for a pet and fed him mulberry leaves. It says, just as the silkworm who eats of mulberry tree spins beautiful silk, so the cricket who eats the leaves will spin a beautiful song." "Then we've got to find a mulberry tree," said Mario. "I have a tree," said Saifong, and his face curled up into a smile as wide as a Halloween pumpkin's, "right outside the window." In the courtyard outside, a mulberry tree was growing. One of its branches almost stuck into the kitchen. Saifong pulled off about a dozen leaves and put one into the cricket cage, but Chester didn't touch it. Mario was dismayed. "He doesn't like it," he said. "Oh, he likes it," said Saifong. "He's just full of dinner now." And that was exactly the truth. Any other time, Chester would have been gobbling up the leaf, but he was stuffed now. Just to show them that the leaves were what he wanted, however, he managed to take one bite. "You see," said Saifong, "he'll eat when he's hungry." Chester was feeling so contented that he had to sing for a while. Everyone listened very quietly. The only other sound was the creaking of the rocking chair, which went very well with the song. Saifong and his friend were very touched by the concert. They sat with their eyes closed and expressions of complete peace on their face. When it was over, the old Chinese gentleman blew his nose on a silk handkerchief. His eyes were moist. Dabbing at them with the handkerchief, he whispered something to Saifong. "He says it's like being in a palace garden to hear the crickets sing," he said. The boy thanked Saifong for the dinner, but said he would have to get going now because it was late. "Come back any time you wish," said Saifong. He put the 11 mulberry leaves in a little box and gave it to Mario. "Plenty of leaves on the tree. I will save all of them for the cricket." Mario thanked him again. The old Chinese gentleman stood up and bowed. Mario bowed to him too. Sai-Fong bowed, and Mario bowed to him. Mario backed toward the door, still bowing, and went out. It had been a very nice evening. He felt formal and polite from all the bowing, and he was glad that his cricket had been able to make the two gentlemen so very happy. All right. Oh, we will continue reading Cricket in Times Square on, let's see, on Monday, I guess. And we're trying to figure out a way to put the Facebook Live up on our YouTube channel so that you all can, if you missed one, you can listen to it. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you soon. Bye.